welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your hexed host, Abraham.
And I am your spiritual host or spiritual guide host, Shane.
Hey, welcome to our 2022 spooky series, Halloween-y themed sort of episodes we always record, or we now traditionally record for the month of October. This is our third installment of this. I'm so happy we're back.
Oh my gosh, it's so much fun. I'm so glad we started doing this because I just love spooky things, and Halloween is my favorite holiday. As we go through the month and we do all the spooky stuff, you know, we always try to come up with really fun topics that are spooky, that either dispel something or describe something, or you know, we just have fun with it. So today we're going to be covering something that I think is really interesting. We're going to do a very brief life and times of Madame Marie Laveau, the VooDoo Queen of New Orleans.
Indeed. I think this will be a lot of fun. You put together some awesome notes. I'm excited to share them with everybody, all the things that we've learned so that they can learn and that sort of thing. And if you find out that learning does you good, then you might choose to join us as a member of our Patreon community. Or if you want to support the show, you can also leave us a rating and review where you do those things. You can send us some mail telling us how much you love us. You can get a tattoo of us somewhere on your body if you wish, or a logo. All of those are super fun things that you can do. Maybe just like start a whole social media community dedicated to extolling the virtues of Why We Do What We Do, the podcast.
Yes, we would support that.
Yeah.
We'll show up and hang out. We'll talk to y'all.
I'll talk more about the actual things that you can do at the end of this episode. I mean, all those things are real, but I mean, the things that are more specific in how you do them.
Yes.
We'll talk about later.
Of course.
So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. Whether you're returning or you're brand new, we are a psychology podcast. We tend to take on things related to all of human behavior. And in October specifically, we go off the beaten path to some, as Shane mentioned, the spookier sort of side of things, and it's just so much fun. I look forward to it every year.
We've got some really good topics this year, I think.
We do.
You know, we're going to be doing some fun things, and we're really excited to share them with you. Between aliens and cryptids and zombies and all the stuff, we're going to talk about all the things. So it's going to be good.
Absolutely. And hey, Shane.
What's up?
Today is October 5th, the day that this is being published. It is October 5th.
Yes.
And there are several things that are celebrated for the day of October, the week of October 5th, and the month of October. Sorry, the day of October 5th, the week of October 5th, and the month of October. That's what I meant to say.
So many things.
So many things. So I'm going to share some of those with you. If you're listening to this on the day that it released, then you might have fun celebrating the fact that it is Balloons Around the World Day. I recommend not releasing them, but if you want to look at them or talk about them or post them on social media, then sure,
or watch
that
it.
Sounds fine. Or watch it. There you go. What are you watching, you may ask? And we respond once again, you're watching it.
Yes, yes.
So October 5th is also Canadian Beer Day and World Teachers Day. So if you're celebrating those things, you should do so. But there's a few in here that I want to highlight that I think are really fun that are things we should also know. It is also National Do Something Nice Day. I'm fully in support of this.
Oh, I like that. Big fan of nice things.
Yes. Hispanic Heritage Month continues, ends October 15th, so we're still in the middle of that. And it is also Fire Prevention Week, Walk Your Dog Week, and National Pumpkin Seed Day.
Oh, that's good. That's perfect for this season.
Yes. Now I'll share just a few of the other month celebrations, and then we'll share some more of those in some of the future episodes we're doing for October. But we have Family History Month, National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and National Fair Trade Month. It's also a month of a whole bunch of mental health things I think I'll share next time. So we'll get to that.
Yeah, I think it sounds good.
Perfect. Well, then let's move on to our actual topic at hand, which is donuts. I mean, Benet donuts.
VooDoo donuts. Love VooDoo donuts. They have so many good vegan options.
Right.
So we are going to talk about Madame Marie Laveau. But in order to understand the VooDoo Queen of New Orleans, I'm going to say it like that every time, by the way.
Awesome. I love the commitment.
Yeah, I'm diving in. We have to understand a little bit about the culture of New Orleans. Have you ever been to New Orleans?
I have. I have been there once or twice. Amazing city. I mean, absolutely. One of a
really
kind,
cool.
really. Yeah.
I've never been anywhere like it. I love it. So in order to understand kind of where she comes from, we have to understand like the actual place where she comes from. So New Orleans is sometimes called the, quote, northernmost Caribbean city or Caribbean.
Nice. Yeah.
Depending on how you like to prefer that or prefer to say that. And originally, the location was actually occupied by Choctaw, Humas, and a variety of other American Indian tribes. That's kind of made up the lay of the land at the time. It's in Louisiana in the United States, and it is on the Gulf of Mexico, which we'll talk about in a second. The city was actually officially founded in 1718 by French colonists, because that's what colonists do.
Yeah, they steal stuff.
Yeah, they steal stuff from other people. So this time, at least it was the French. At least it wasn't somebody else. It was the French this time.
Still the Europeans, unfortunately.
Yeah, still the Europeans. So yeah, real problem. But it became part of the U.S. through the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. So Louisiana wasn't actually part of the U.S. officially until 1803. Now, throughout its history, French and Spanish occupations have influenced the area's development, and further, the introduction of slavery to the area brought a major African influence to the port city of New Orleans.
Indeed. Yeah, very interesting. As a major American city, it is easy to assume that American English was the primary language, because that's the primary language spoken throughout the United States. It's the only language nationally recognized, although some states do also recognize other languages within their state. However, when you're down in New Orleans and Louisiana, you can also find French, Spanish, and Creole present as part of the sort of regional language, and particularly back at the time that Madame Marie Laveau would have been haunting the place.
Yeah. Among others too. I mean, it is a very unique melting pot compared to anywhere else.
Yeah, and it's kind of due to the fact, as we'll talk about in a moment, where it's situated and the general geography of the place.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, regarding music, NOLA, as sometimes it's called, is one of the most musical cities in the U.S. Jazz and blues play integral parts of the culture, and there are several large festivals that highlight the music itself. It's a very musical town. I mean, when you go into the French Quarter, there are like big bands just walking down the street playing.
On the street. Yep. Super talented.
Yeah, super talented, super fun.
Yeah.
And just like one of those things you're kind of like, huh. Okay, I did not expect this, and I love this so much.
Right.
And different than busking, like not like somebody with a guitar playing on the corner, like begging for change, like straight up, like full on outfits, like big bands, horns, just playing through the streets, marching through the streets. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Now, add to that mix, you've got Creole music, you've got Zydeco music, and Delta blues, and you've got this really unique sound that you can't really find anywhere else in the world. That is such an interesting mix of stuff.
I've heard it also pronounced Zydeco. I guess you could put the accent on the second one. I don't know.
Yeah,
but
that's probably
Zydeco.
more correct than what I said. So I'll give you that.
What else? So yeah, the NOLA, N-O for New Orleans and L-A for Louisiana. NOLA, that's as you said, that's why it's sometimes called that. New Orleans is, as you mentioned, also a port city, and it's as important because this is why a lot of people might end up here. It resides on the Mississippi River, roughly 105 miles upriver from the Gulf of Mexico. And the city is essentially embedded in the Mississippi River Delta. And because of its location, that makes it really an ideal point of trade and commerce for a lot of people. And so if you're walking around, I mean, you're in the heart of New Orleans, you can walk right up to the Mississippi River and see that gigantic thing that it just flows across the entire United States.
Yeah.
There's like casino boats on it, I think is still a thing.
Yeah.
And it's large and beautiful and really incredible. So it's really enmeshed around that. And again, it's important because so much trade can happen on boats coming in and out of the Gulf, coming up and down the river, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really cool to see. I'd never seen the Mississippi River, and I'm walking it, when you're in the French Quarter, which we'll talk about a little bit later, the river is right there. Like you can see the Mississippi. It's like only a couple blocks away. It's like there is the Mississippi River. And I actually had my beignets stolen in the presence of the Mississippi River. It was a real bad time for me.
Was it VooDoo?
It was VooDoo. No, I was tricked. You know what it was? I was totally like scammed. The dude came up and said, I bet you I could tell you where he got them shoes, and that's one of the oldest tricks in the book. And he got me, and then his friend took my beignets. So,
wow,
yeah, it was great. So anyway, New Orleans, one of the things that it's known for, and arguably, I would say this is my favorite food city that I've ever eaten at. It was in New Orleans.
Yeah, man, wow.
And that was before I was vegan. So like, if you're somebody who likes seafood, or before I was vegetarian. So if you're somebody who likes seafood, it's a really great seafood place. I'm going to say genuinely the best food I've ever had. Much of the cuisine is made up of Creole, French, Spanish dishes, along with Southern influences. So you've got these big pots, big stews. You've got low country boils. You've got etouffee. You've got gumbo. And all of these make up some of the more famous dishes of the region. You know, you've got like shrimp po' boys, which is, you know, basically just like, hey, this is what we can grab. We'll throw it on a bun, and this is what we're going to eat.
Right.
And so a lot of the food is very much so like that, very like stick to your ribs, Southern cooking, but with a lot of the French and Spanish cuisine kind of thrown in there. Now, what you should do is go on and get yourself some mud bugs. You hear? So if you never had prawns, it's like it's like a big thing, like prawns. They call them mud bugs there, which I think is my favorite name for any animal at this point in time.
Yeah, but your Southern accent, the real Southern one is very good. I enjoy it.
Oh, the mud bugs. You got to go get them mud bugs.
Isn't jambalaya also from this region? I mean, it's probably, again, influenced by the things. Yeah, I love jambalaya. I feel like I've had really good Louisiana, New Orleans jambalaya that was
like all of that stuff. Jambalaya, etouffee, gumbo, like all that stuff is from there, and it's all really good.
Yeah.
Also, the best like vegan hot dog I've ever had was in New Orleans. It was a place called Dreamy Weenies. So like even they even do all that stuff well. So which is great.
Yeah, it was just a boiled carrot, but you know. Just kidding.
Pretty much. It was a bowl of carrot with black beans on it. It was wonderful.
Now, as many people know, and part of the reason we're talking about this, we can talk about food. We can discuss the virtues of the wonderful cuisine that you can find in this awesome city. But one of the things we're talking about is spookiness. And this city is one of the spookiest cities in the country, famously, right?
Yeah.
Many of the cemeteries include above ground tombs due to the fact that the city is below sea level, meaning that if they put bodies in the groundwater will actually push them back out. And so they'll get waterlogged and that sort of thing. So it's not a good scene. So if you go to a cemetery, it's a lot of mausoleums. It's a lot of above ground type tombs and that sort of thing. And one of the greatest levels in the video game ever is Tony Hawk's Underground 2, where you can drop into a portal to hell in a graveyard. So connecting the dots.
Yeah, you can hit a ramp and literally drop in, and it takes you straight to hell. It's great.
Does that video game take place in New Orleans?
That level does.
Oh, that level.
Yeah, there's a New Orleans level, and you just skate around all of the French Quarter, and you know, you do all your combos, and then you hear all the big bands and stuff. But the one part of it that's really cool is like once you beat the level, you can actually do this thing where you like hit a vert ramp and then literally drop into hell.
Wow. So I thought I had played Underground 2, but I don't remember that. So maybe I didn't play Underground 2.
Or maybe you didn't unlock it yet.
Maybe I didn't unlock it yet. That could be the other problem.
Yeah. So spooky. Such a spooky city. Now, another part of the thing that comes along with anything Louisiana, but specifically New Orleans, is this idea of voodoo. It plays a critical role in the development of the city. There's a lot of ties and a lot of influences in the city because of it. So there's something called Louisiana voodoo, or Voodoo Louisianus, or New Orleans voodoo. It's a practice that really has no formal theology. And we're going to talk more about that later.
Yeah.
What it ends up being is more of a collection of rituals and practices that produce a spiritual belief, a spiritual practice, and a particular hierarchy within that. But again, we'll talk more later. But one of the most important voodoo practitioners is the voodoo queen of New Orleans herself, Madame Marie Laveau.
Awesome. That was such a good setup. And I think we are being haunted by some ads. Okay, I don't think I ever told you this, but did you know that I went on like a haunted tour of New Orleans? You probably didn't, because you're asking me if I'd been there. Yeah, it was like a walking tour.
I didn't know that.
They walk you around various old locations, and they tell you ghost stories about those locations, take you up into some old buildings. Yeah, it was really fun, actually. I wasn't sure what to expect, because I'd never been on a haunted tour before. I'm given to understand they're very common in New Orleans, which makes a lot of sense. And yeah, they're very interesting. I think, always take it with a grain of salt, but they're there to entertain, not necessarily there to educate you, but they're fun. So I recommend them.
Recommendations. Speaking of ghost tours and spookiness and all that stuff, we have to talk about the subject at hand, which is Madame Marie Laveau.
Yeah.
Marie Catherine Laveau was born September 10th, 1801, maybe? There's dispute about when she was born. She might have been born in 1776 or 1778 or 1774. Nobody really knows.
It's quite a jump.
Yeah, quite a jump. Part of this is due to just poor record keeping at the time. The other part of this is that she was born to Charles Laveau Trudeau. Also, I just want to point this out. So the name Charles Laveau Trudeau has 0 letter O's in that name.
That's a good
0.
point. Yeah.
So, and that's just part of like, you'll see that a lot with this. Maybe that's why they didn't keep records. There was like, it cost too much for the type letters.
They're like, we don't understand even what you're saying when you say your name.
Yeah, exactly.
Any relation to Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada?
I don't know. I mean, the guy is rich and white, so it's possible. I like Justin Trudeau, though.
Yeah.
Now, she was born in the French Quarter of, or what's described today as the French Quarter of New Orleans. So she was born to Charles Laveau Trudeau and Marguerite d'Arcantel. Marguerite was one of his slaves and a mistress to Charles Laveau Trudeau.
Sure.
Happens, right? So Charles was a wealthy Creole plantation owner and Marguerite was his mistress. She was reportedly of Black and Choctaw Indian descent, and that's kind of, you'll see some of that play a role later in Marie's life.
So that's where we're coming at with Marie Catherine Laveau, or who will become Madame Marie Laveau. She was raised on a farm, did receive a decent education, which is great. She was a devout Catholic and went to mass daily. So obviously she had the opportunity to participate more effectively and more meaningfully in society than maybe others of a similar situation might have been able to do.
Yep, absolutely. And that Catholic part's going to come back to play a role too later.
Yeah.
Now, in August 1819, she married Jacques Paris, a free man of color who had escaped the Haitian Revolution to New Orleans. And you'll see there's a big Haitian population in New Orleans as well.
Yeah, for sure.
He reportedly disappeared in 1824, though there's evidence that he just ran off. He was eventually reported dead. And what ended up happening was that after that, Marie began to refer to herself as Widow Paris and was left to raise their 2 children alone. So she was abandoned. Nobody really knows what happened, but she was a single mom at this point.
With all those French names, wouldn't it? I feel like it would be Jacques Paris, and that her name would be Widow Paris.
Yeah, probably. And that actually sounds fancier.
That'd be Marie Paris Laveau.
Yeah, Marie Paris Laveau.
After the disappearance of Paris, or Paris, she began a relationship with Jean-Louis Christophe Duminy de Glapion. The name's getting increasingly complicated and lengthy now.
Yeah, very long name.
They apparently enjoyed each other's company because they had 15 children together. However, several of them succumbed to yellow fever in some of the many outbreaks in New Orleans, Louisiana, or NOLA at the time. And that's actually fairly common. We've talked about that before modern medicine. It was very common to expect that children would die. And so that's part of the reason that families would go with the approach of have as many as you possibly can, because they were unlikely that the majority of them would actually survive into adulthood. And then medicine paved the way so that the majority of them could survive into adulthood. And some people felt that they still needed to have as many as they possibly could.
And at the time, too, part of the reason there were so many yellow fever outbreaks in New Orleans is because there was really poor drainage, which makes sense given that it was below sea level. So it's very difficult to drain water away from a place where water easily flows into.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
She eventually became a hairdresser. She received a lot of her training and did that, which I thought was interesting. She was able to meet the needs of her family just because she had such a big family, but she would mostly serve Black clients that were employed as house servants at the time. And during those meetings, she would actually gather information about the lifestyle and concerns of those wealthy white families. She would actually get some of the kind of inside scoop or inside information from those Black servants about the families that were the wealthy upper class in New Orleans at the time.
Very important, that all features. And so during this time, she also did some nursing, which included for some reason, minor surgeries and also just general caretaking. But using this information, because it's very important, the people who deal in information can have a lot of power.
Yes.
She eventually began to get paid for personal consults and interventions from families, often serving to provide spiritual guidance or protections from evil.
Yes. This is, I think, a really fascinating thing and an important characteristic of Marie Laveau. So she was well known for being a caretaker, and the nursing part of this is really important. And this will come back later as we kind of talk about it, but I thought that was kind of a fun, an interesting thing that she did a little bit of nursing at the time. I'm a hairdresser, but I nurse on the side, as opposed to being a nurse and doing hairdressing on the side.
Right.
So,
and also, the occasional surgery.
Yeah, and the occasional surgery because, it's the 1800s and, life is wild. So now her spirituality and guidance practices were believed to be part of her familial background in African spirituality, coming from Marguerite specifically. After the passing of her mother, though, she was reported to show a greater interest in spirituality and religion. She had, like we said before, she was Catholic, she went to mass every day, but she seemed to gather more interest after her mother had passed.
Now, she began training under Dr. John Bayou, who was a well-known conjurer or root worker. But in looking at this, I'm curious, Shane, what is a root worker?
I will explain that, but I have to say, Dr. John Bayou is the most perfect Louisiana name I've ever heard in my life.
True. Yeah, that is very...
The only way you can make it better was it would be Dr. John Bayou Gatorman or something like that. Now, root workers or root doctors are traditional healers that are often found in the rural South and in predominantly in Black communities. So you'll find that a lot. And there's a lot of kind of ties to African medicine and spiritualism around that. They are primarily defined by their use of herbs, roots, potions, and spells to either help or hurt someone. And when we say that, we'll talk more about how some of the magics and stuff that are covered were used to smite enemies. But for the most part, it was a more natural, like naturalistic healing, naturalistic medicine is what we find here.
Yeah, don't give away too much. We're getting to the fun stuff.
Yeah, they were also called conjurers. I want to say that, so root workers were sometimes called conjurers as well.
I think that says a lot about their profession right there.
Yes, it's 100%.
What is a synonym for root worker? Conjurer.
Yeah, conjurer. Yep.
Got it.
For sure.
Now, Laveau became quite proficient at the practices that Dr. Bayou shared with her. Because she had the means, motive, and opportunity, she began combining Catholic and voodoo practices together. So she could be found using holy water, incense, statues of saints, and Christian prayers, among other practices. And in doing this made Laveau's spiritual practices, it made them more acceptable to the sort of upper caste, NOLA crowd, because they had the familiar element of Catholicism and the sort of mysticism of voodoo that was also, part of the culture, intriguing, but fit more easily into the worldview. And in doing this, it eventually led her to become quite the figurehead in the community, well-known, well-respected, and with a not insignificant amount of power.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so much so that she quickly became the voodoo queen of New Orleans and actually began hosting public voodoo rituals and ceremonies. And that's actually really important, too, because when we talk about voodoo, you'll find that this is not a public practice.
Right.
So these rituals and ceremonies were a big deal. And the fact that she was doing them in public, ruffled some feathers. But what ends up happening is as her rituals become and her practices become more popular, she was able to actually overthrow some of the other voodoo queens and hold the sole title of Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. And so there were some other folks in the area that were doing that. Specifically, she had several rivals. Two of note were Sanité Dede, I believe is how you pronounce that, and a woman named Rosalie.
Got it. You know what they call when you overthrow the Voodoo Queen?
What is it?
A voodoo coup.
A voodoo coup. I like that. That's good. I was like, as soon as I said what, I was like, oh no, I know it.
It was an intuitive joke.
It works. It's effective.
So you kind of spilled the beans on this earlier, but we're going to say it now because it's fun, is the kind of work that she was employed to do. So people are hiring her for all kinds of things. We've mentioned several of them already.
Yes.
There's the consulting and the other powers and that sort of thing. But much of her regular work included selling gris-gris, or if you're pronouncing it in the French way, gris-gris.
Uh-huh.
She was selling charms, powders, cures, and destroying enemies.
Yes. Wild.
So metal.
Yes, so metal. So gris-gris is actually a traditional amulet or charm which provides protection from evil or brings luck. They were kind of like these handmade, hand-produced little amulets and charms that were part of the practice.
Sort of like wearing crystals now today. That people do that.
It's effectively the same thing. Yeah. 100%.
Here's a rock. Wear it. That'll be $20.
Yeah, exactly. So as the voodoo queen, she would do all these things. Most of her work was healing and caretaking and all that. She would eventually die in her St. Anne Street home at 86. So she lived quite a long time practicing, especially for this time period. Despite having such an intense title, she was actually very much so loved by her community, specifically for her humanitarian work. She did a lot of humanitarian work, a lot of practices, mostly towards positivity, not really trying to smite people or hurt people and all that. And she was actually noted as one of the kindest, and this is a direct quote, one of the kindest women who ever lived, end quote, by writer Lafcadio Hearn.
I think it's Lafcadio, but I feel like I've seen that name before. But
yeah. It's I would go with Lafcadio as well. I should say.
It's a cool name. I like it.
It is really cool.
Yeah. So she was gentle aside from smiting enemies, but other than that, very, very sweet.
So I think this is actually something we've got to talk about for a second.
Okay.
The smiting enemies thing. We're going to break down what voodoo is as much as we can in a minute, but essentially a lot of Madame Laveau's reputation might have been that she was smiting enemies and casting charms and all that stuff, but so much of her history and so much of her biography is lore and legend and like stories, all the stuff that kind of happens in the background where people are whispering in the shadows and kind of sharing like, oh, she cast a spell on this person and da-da-da-da-da. Because one, people don't really understand what voodoo is.
Right.
You know, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But people don't really know what voodoo is. And a lot of it was she had made enemies of the voodoo community because she usurped the crown to be the voodoo queen of New Orleans. So a lot of her stories and a lot of the scariness is just hearsay more than anything.
Yeah.
Aside from the fact that she was a black woman in power in the 1800s, you know, people were not super thrilled with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, you can imagine with those things, the reputation you earn is not necessarily the reputation that you deserve. And oftentimes I think we tend to remember the things that are the more sensational,
of course,
sort of headlines that stand out, and not so much the mundane day-to-day stuff that is more representative of who she actually was as a person. But yeah, I mean, that's essentially, that's her life. As you mentioned, we have more to say about sort of voodoo and what that all entails, because I think although her life is very interesting and fascinating, and there's a lot of cool stuff to unpack there, we're still like halfway through an episode, I think. And what they say in the advertisement business is halfway through is time to insert some ads. Shane, what can you tell me about voodoo?
Oh my God. So diving into this topic, I just want to say before we start, this has been one of the most complex topics I've ever looked at in my life.
Wow.
Just looking at anything voodoo.
That's saying something.
There's so much. I did my best. I found some interesting bullet points, and I want to be clear about that. Bullet points specifically.
Right.
But honestly, it's tough to say if this is even going to be helpful. Based on the nature of the practice, the lack of texts, the complexity of the thing, the voodoo thing that it is, voodoo deserves its own podcast series, college course, series of texts, whatever it is. It deserves far more than a few paragraphs. But I think it's important for context here. Because if we are going to do a dive on somebody called the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans, we need to have at least a basic understanding of what voodoo is. So we're going to do our best, but this is not anywhere near complete. I'll say that.
Okay, thank you for the context. And yes, I appreciate the sentiment and understanding the limits of what we're taking on in our discussion here. So, as we mentioned before, voodoo or vodou, maybe VODOU, is a spiritual belief system that has its roots in African practices. And due to the slave trade, much of the rituals and practices they were transplanted. They began to develop worldwide, and each region developed its own sort of unique practices and rituals from those people who sort of brought it with them to where they ended up.
Yeah, so some historians believe that the origins of voodoo date back at least 6,000 years ago, with its roots in Benin, formerly Dahomey in West Africa. So last week, I recommended The Woman King as a movie. It's based in Dahomey. It's super, super interesting stuff. Yeah.
That's super fascinating.
So this is part of my own ignorance. I had never heard of Dahomey, the kingdom of Dahomey and all that, until I'd seen The Woman King. And now I'm like super fascinated with it and wanting to learn more about the historical context of Dahomey, because it was one of the most powerful African nations that has ever existed. Wow. So, we learn about like, the Greek Empire and Roman Empire and all that stuff, but we never, we learn, all the European stuff, but I can't ever remember learning about African kingdoms and empires and some of the development, unless it had to do with white people showing up and ruining everything.
Yeah.
So it was really fascinating. So I was really glad to see that this was a callback, and I'm going to spend some more time on that as just part of my own learning.
I do think, we are woefully uneducated about so much history of most of the world.
Yes.
I didn't know about what they call the partition in India until recently.
Yeah.
I feel like I know very little about most of Chinese history, which is vast and incredibly expansive and complex. Yeah, I feel like it's pretty much we learn about a little bit of European history and then United States history. And they're like, and that's all you need to know to understand how we got to the world we're in today.
Yeah, genuinely, I think the most I learned about African history was that I believe Hannibal marched from Africa into Europe with elephants.
Okay.
But it was leaving Africa to go to Europe. It wasn't like, it wasn't anything cool. Oh, yeah. And I guess the Bible, too.
Yeah, there's that little part. Yeah, I was gonna say pretty much all of the African history, aside from a little bit of like apartheid that I learned about, is Egyptian. Like you would get a bunch of Egyptian stuff, and they're like, and that was Africa. Like,
yeah,
was it
yeah, exactly.
all of
Cleopatra. You're like, wait a second.
It seems like that's so big. It's not that big a part of Africa to just focus on Egypt, but
yeah, exactly.
Right. No, that is where we're at. This is how we're helping you listeners. You get to learn about this stuff now.
Yeah. And also we're trying to be humble in that we just don't know. So we want to learn more.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. We were talking about voodoo though.
Yes, we were. Yes.
And so much of Louisiana voodoo practices are secretive, with many of the principles and practice and sort of exercises and that sort of thing done outside of the public eye. So the practitioners often share knowledge and practice only through their oral traditions to maintain it being sort of part of the group of people who are in the know, if you will. And that means that there is no formal sacred text. If you want to learn about it, you kind of have to learn about it from someone who's learned about it from someone else. And again, the oral tradition. Yeah. And there's also no hierarchy. Many of the rituals are essentially adapted and changed based on the unique practitioners in their context. So wherever it goes, with whoever it goes, therewith. Yeah. Too many prepositions, but you know what I'm saying? It becomes its own sort of unique version of it. And it's kind of an interesting phenomenon in how it is able to both continue to exist and also morph and adapt as it moves around.
Yeah. Now, in the majority of voodoo rituals specifically, the goal is to commune with the Loa, or the pantheon of spirits. And so that's a big part of what voodoo is. It's all about the spirit. Everything is spirit. And we'll talk more about that later. Now, in each ritual, there are typically 4 phases. There's preparation, invocation, possession, and farewell, because possession is also part of kind of the general voodoo practice. And so each phase includes a unique song that is sung. There's no kind of start or end that is definitive. A specific song is sung at each of these levels to kind of delineate which part or which phase they're in that moment. So we're going to go ahead and do our best to talk about what we understand of these 4 phases and not go into too much detail because there's just no detail for it.
And this is all super interesting. I think it's very different from what you might have thought voodoo was. And that's what I think is really cool about this part in particular. Yes. And we'll also talk more about that. So as you mentioned, the first phase, preparation. During this phase, the altar is developed. Sacrifices are prepared for invoking the spirit identified for that specific ceremony. So that's how the first phase is arranged.
Yes. And then the second phase is the invocation, where the spirit that they are trying to contact or commune with is invoked through some type of ritual. And the ritual itself brings the spirit into the visible world, which is a big part of this, and kind of prepares that spirit and the person, the subject of the ceremony, for the next phase, which is possession.
Right. So then during possession, the practitioner or the afflicted party, whoever it is then possessed by the spirit for the duration of this phase. And so that's basically what the whole sort of thing goes, is set it up, bring out the spirit, possess a body with the spirit sort of thing.
Yeah. Put the spirit in the vessel. And then there's farewell, right? Farewell being that the spirit leaves the body, the ceremony is completed, and we move on from that. As a quick asterisk to this is all I could find on it.
Okay.
I'm sure that there are texts somewhere. I could not in my research find it just yet. So if for some reason we study it more and we find more information, we will update to get that. But that's as far as our understanding is based on what I've seen so far.
And if any of you listeners know more about this, please write in and let us know. Be more than happy to share. But yeah, I do want to come back to sort of thinking about, so we talked about the 4 phases: preparation, invocation, possession, and farewell. And again, just as a reminder, the point of this was to commune with Loa, the pantheon of spirits. So it's to essentially just commune with that world.
Yes.
And that has to do with a little bit with the philosophy of voodoo itself. And voodoo primarily serves as a philosophy and practice with the assumption that, as you were pointing out earlier, everything is spirit.
Yes.
Humans are just spirits that inhabit the visible world. It's visible to us now. The unseen world is populated by Lua, LWA, or spirits, Mystè, mysteries, Invisible, the invisibles, and Zonj, angels. And then also the spirits of our ancestors, because, where else are they going to go?
Yeah, exactly. It's not like if you read Thanosphere by Kurt Vonnegut, it's there in space, but that's a different thing. So, which is very scary to think about. Space ghosts,
Coast to coast.
Coast to coast. Now, many of the practices are focused on what is called the Sevi Loi, or to serve the spirits. And prayers, rites, feasts, other ceremonies are centered around serving a variety of spirits, ranging from more powerful to more local or ancestral spirits. But the idea is to serve and give thanks to the spirits of the invisible world, or the non-visible world. Because again, humans are spirits that populate the spirit world, or the visible world.
Right.
The invisible world is where the spirits reside.
Now, is it still invisible when you're in the spirit, when you're a spirit in the spirit world, though?
I don't know. I mean, do spirits have eyes? Are they able to see? Is it I mean, I just don't know. I genuinely don't know. I don't know what the definition of visible and invisible would be.
One of the things that we love to do is bust some myths. It's one of our things.
It's a pastime.
For the show. It's a pastime. It's a habit, a way of being, a thing that we enjoy. Part of our brand, really, if you think about it.
Yeah.
And voodoo is so interesting, but there is a lot of things that are very misunderstood about voodoo. So let's dispel some myths about this practice.
Yeah. So the first one I thought that was worth doing is because you see this a lot with like Hollywood portrayals and whatnot, the use of voodoo dolls. Well, voodoo dolls are not used to torture. They're used as like good luck charms. They're used as like stand-ins or like homunculus type of thing, where it's just kind of like, it's designed to be like almost a vessel to put positivity and stuff into. They're not used for torture. What they do use the pins and needles for, because they do use pins and needles, they typically use them to pin photographs or drawings to the doll, not to cause pain, not to make it so that somebody is doubling over and like after they've been stabbed. It's nothing like that. It's designed to like make sure that there are specific artifacts tied to the doll as part of the ritual practice.
In some instances, trigger warning for those of you who do not like to hear about bad things happening to animals, skip ahead about 30 seconds. But in some instances, animal sacrifice is used, not in a way that's often portrayed in movies. It's not the weird, gruesome, pull out the entrails stuff. Most often, any sacrifice is used the intention is to rejuvenate the spirit after their work serving the community. So the spirit of the animal. So essentially, it's meant to be a parting gift, the sweet release of death.
Yeah. And part of it too is to rejuvenate the actual spirit in the invisible world too, right? So like the spirits themselves, besides the animal, are serving the community at large, and they're doing the day in, day out work to protect from evil spirits and to protect the community. So an animal sacrifice is designed to be like a thank you for, making sure that I don't go to hell, essentially.
Yeah. Speaking of hell, voodoo is making a pact with the devil, correct?
Actually, no. Voodoo does not mean that the person has made a pact with the devil, and I think that's a really important thing. We'll talk more about kind of the Catholic perspective on voodoo, but yeah, it's not a pact with the devil. As a matter of fact, we were talking about this kind of during a quick break during the episode. There's a couple things like when I went to New Orleans that I got to partake in and like kind of hang out with some of the voodoo stuff. One of them was this item called a chinchito, which is like a little hand-carved wooden pig that's supposed to bring good luck. It's very tiny. It's like very cute.
Is it a wooden pig?
It's a wooden pig, yeah. It's a three-legged wooden pig.
Oh, it's got 3 legs, too.
It's got 3 legs, yeah.
Is that by tradition? It's 3
legs? Yeah, the tradition. So it specifically says here, in the small village of Palmer, Chile, it is believed that chinchitos, little pigs, bring good luck. The 3-legged chinchitos are especially fortunate and are traditionally given to friends as a token of goodwill and love.
I see.
I got that. I don't know the accuracy of that, but that is a thing that I have. There's also something I got called worry dolls, which you're supposed to basically breathe your anxieties and your stresses to the worry dolls, and they're supposed to carry them for you. Mm-hmm. I don't know where my worry dolls are, but
I'm worried about them.
I worry about my worry dolls. Oh no. But my point is more so that a lot of the little things like this, these like little charms, these trinkets, these items are designed to be very positive and protective. They're not supposed to be scary and harmful and hurting your enemies. I mean, we joked before about the voodoo queen of New Orleans destroying enemies, but that's not really what voodoo is used for. It's designed to protect from evil spirits and protect from harm and bring positivity and light and love into somebody's world, not the opposite.
You can see why that would be less sort of sexy and attractive to the Hollywood writers and producers who wanted to spin something more provocative and sensational out of it.
Sure.
And take, little bits and pieces of it that were accurate portrayal of what some voodoo practitioners might do and twist it into tropes that we now come to believe just represent voodoo, even though they actually don't, which is kind of unfortunate.
If I were to hazard a guess, I would say there's two things at play here.
Okay.
This is me, armchair historian here.
Okay.
Based on my own learning history about things. One, I imagine that religions are probably not super stoked about competing religions.
Fair point.
So it's very easy to make a smear campaign about a religious practice that doesn't agree or jive with your religious practice. So It's very easy that maybe somebody that wasn't practicing, I don't know, like I'll hazard a guess and say Christianity, maybe decided that somebody else was part of the devil's work. So I could see that happening. The second thing is this is largely taking place in the Black community. So based on my learning history, I would imagine that white folks were not really stoked about this. And again, use this as an example to other large population of people. So I imagine those two things probably played a pretty big role in how this got kind of portrayed in the public eye.
It's a good point. You got to imagine it kind of feels like if voodoo had instead been popularized by white Aunt Karen, it would have maybe been more favorably viewed, and they would have found a way to shoehorn it into existing religion a little more in a more friendly way without having to demonize it. You make some very good points there. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, that's just, I don't know, just a guess. Just a guess.
Well, you mentioned previously we had an unfortunate little technical break, and you don't hear those things. So we're about to have another unplanned technical breakdown in 3, 2, 1. All right, those advertisements for you. Let's talk about a little more of the science behind what's going on with voodoo.
Yeah, so I think it's important, at least in Madame Laveau's context, to understand how a situation like this can come into play. And we kind of talked about this before, about how voodoo was a little bit demonized by people in power, but it is thought that Laveau's powers of fortune telling and kind of like the good omens and stuff and divination and all that were actually a result of her informant network. So the idea is like, we kind of, you alluded to it earlier about the idea that like, you know, people who deal in information have a lot of power.
Right.
And so as we mentioned earlier in her career, when she would gather information from her clientele while working as a hairdresser, it's very likely that she could have used that information to help kind of put on the perception that maybe she knew more than, you know, the standard person who has just met that person, right? Like met somebody new. So it's possible in her rise to power, she was able to build that network further and have a pretty significant network of people who were helping give her information so that she could be more informed in her consultations.
You got to imagine that in a group of people for whom the idea of parsimony is so foreign.
Yeah.
That like to them, it makes much more sense that if they were to say, how could she possibly know that? And the answer to be voodoo, they'd be like, yes, that's how she could possibly know that. There's literally no other plausible explanation for it. Right. It is voodoo or bust.
Yeah. And then add to that because there is no text, people don't know what voodoo is. So anything could be voodoo.
And actually, that's an important piece of this too.
Yeah.
Just as you said, the rituals can more or less then be catered to the specific needs of the person who's seeking the services of spiritual guidance and that sort of thing. Yeah. The help, the healing, the whatever of the voodoo practitioner. It's contextual, voodoo is. And what this means, I think is very important in understanding this, is that first of all, that does explain why it changes so much. Okay? It's so flexibly adaptable to the circumstances. But it also means that whatever you say, 100% acceptable as a way of describing what you're doing in terms of voodoo. You literally can't be wrong.
Yeah.
This is a really powerful position to be in. So it's understandable that, although it can be a bit of a gamble, because, you know, if you set yourself up too unbelievable, you might not actually have people come to you. And if you never produce any result, you might also have trouble there. But it would motivate the entrepreneurial spirit, if you will, to take that gamble if they thought they could make it work, because then it puts you in a position of, if it works, it's because it's voodoo. If it doesn't work, it's because voodoo is fickle, or you know, the person didn't want it enough, or the spirits weren't willing at the time. I mean, you just make it up, like you just make it up on the spot. And that's how so many other things work in the sort of mystic way of approaching the world.
Yeah.
Not unlike most religions.
Yeah, exactly. Now, another part of this, too, is much of Madame Laveau's notoriety came from sociocultural importance. So she was a caretaker, she was a healer, she was a helper, she was somebody who was invested in the community at large. And so it makes sense that she would rise to power and fame in that community when she is designed to be a force of good in that community. Right. Somebody embedded in the voodoo culture that is in a city that is so just has that vibe to it and has like that is an important part of the city as well, right? So she's a practitioner in a city that buys into this. And so it makes sense that she was kind of positioned and stationed to take on a larger role in the community. And so it's just from the perspective of like right place, right time, motivation, and skill set, she 100% would move into that role pretty easily because voodoo was so important in that culture.
You know, it really sounds like voodoo in New Orleans in particular, and maybe in other places, it really sounds like sort of a less violent mafia, you know?
Yeah.
Right, because they've got like a network of people who are informants. They've got like a lot of social power. They actually do a lot to help the community because that brings people to sort of rally behind them and help protect them from outsiders and that sort of thing, and allows them sort of be insulated and do their thing. And also they continue to go to them for help, but they're not necessarily turning the screws to people, except maybe in flexing how much information they have about things. And so it seems like they're sort of more on the pacifist end of a mafia version thing, but not dissimilar, it seems like.
Yeah, no, it's pretty accurate. I think that's fair. I also want to say too, real quick before we do the last like bullet point on this, we keep using the term voodoo. There are a lot of different terms and versions of this. Like we're specifically referencing Louisiana and like New Orleans voodoo, but there is, I mean, when you get into it, there is hoodoo and there's all kinds of stuff that we are not talking about. So that again is going to be an entire series on its own at some point in time for somebody. I don't even know if we're the right people to do that.
Right.
You know, but I think it is important to note that like, while we keep using the term voodoo, there are so many different terms and words and phrases and labels that go along with this. So if this seems like we're overgeneralizing, that's all the information we could find because it's it's not a written language, not a written practice. But two, it's because there are so many things. It's like trying to explain Christianity in a way that's like, you know, in a couple paragraphs. You just can't because there are so many sects and branches and denominations.
Yeah, you're leaving a lot out. And, you know, to the point, that's part of the reason we sort of honed this down to one major key figure and what voodoo meant with respect to her. Yes. And not just what is voodoo in general. And as you said, it would be cool to tackle like another way that voodoo showed up and what it was called and how it's practiced in another episode, or someone else can tackle that if that's what they want to do. But just going back to, one of the last things here is that it's likely sort of understanding how voodoo, if it's relying on sort of hokum, snake oil, and mysticism to sell itself, how does it survive? Well, kind of similar to the way that most snake oil continues to survive to this day. It's likely that many of the effects from the rituals were the result of, if they worked at all, it was probably a placebo effect of some sort. And if it didn't work, again, you could just blame it on something else. So there isn't an agreed upon medicinal effect, and more than likely the sort of general effects of spirituality. And going back to your idea of the worry dolls, is actually within practice of psychology, this idea of unloading your emotions in a particular way, or your feelings. That metaphor is used in various versions of different practices of psychology, because essentially all you're trying to do is help someone adjust their language about their relationship to their other language about their emotions, and sort of just creating a distance between it, or repackaging it in a new way so that they then just orient to it in a different way. And it's just a way of shaping your language around things. And so it's not unreasonable to think that would work in a totally different context, where you instruct someone to unload their worries onto a doll, or to imagine their fortune is attributable to a hex or to a token that's supposed to bring them bad or good luck. And so it does, I think, make a lot of sense from a psychological standpoint that those would be effective strategies that would have someone feel the impacts of it without it actually changing anything about the physical nature of the reality.
Right, 100%.
We have some other interesting tidbits here.
Yeah. One of them is that it's estimated that nearly 60 million people practice of some form of voodoo worldwide. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot. That's a big number.
That's a really big number of people. And so it's interesting that voodoo is not talked about in the same circles as like major religions, because it is a spiritual practice and it is practiced by so many people across the entire world.
Now, we talked about Catholicism a little bit. Interestingly, the Catholic Church actually does not seem to have a very vocal or aggressive approach to voodoo. And actually, in many Catholic practices have been embedded in voodoo practice. And some practitioners even include ceremonies for recognized saints in their voodoo rituals.
Yeah.
Although I don't think you would find a lot of remnants of voodoo inside of a Catholic ceremony. You might find some Catholic ceremonies in a voodoo ceremony.
Right.
Rituals in a voodoo ceremony. So that's kind of an interesting piece of this, is that the Catholic Church isn't saying necessarily like whole cloth that's bad. They kind of are just like, okay, they're doing some stuff over there that's not really our bag, but whatever.
Yeah.
And part of that probably is because they're using our stuff to do their rituals. So not the worst thing.
Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting. It does make sense from a colonizer standpoint, right? You know, like you would see white centric or European centric practices embedded in the black community because of colonization.
Right.
I also thought it was interesting that it was it's such an interesting melding, but that's also a really cool thing to see in terms of like blending of cultures and how that turns into its own thing, I guess.
Sure.
One of my favorite tidbits, though, and this specifically has to do with Madame Marie Laveau, was that the Misfits, the band The Misfits, if you're not familiar, the punk band that put out, Earth AD and Walk Among Us and Famous Monsters and all that, they were arrested and accused of attempting to exhume her gravesite during a concert in 1982. But of course, when you get to the Misfits, they are even less accurate than really anybody. Nobody can agree upon a story about what happened. But the report is they tried to exhume what they thought was a gravesite. Nobody really knows where Marie Laveau was buried or where her tomb or her mausoleum is. But they were accused and arrested as a result of that. Speaking
of bands, there's the Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, gained some popularity in I think the early 2000s, maybe late 90s. What was their song that got really famous?
Oh, I don't remember. I never really listened to them. My brother listened to them a whole lot, but they were like a ska band that would have songs in Spanish and stuff.
Yeah, I think they did Zoot Suit Riot. Maybe was
no. That's the Cherry Poppin' Daddies, my friend.
Oh, you're right.
Which is a totally super problematic name.
Yeah. So. No, you're right. Okay, I got that wrong. Thank you for catching that.
No, you're on the right path. So they did Mr. Pinstripe Suit. So they were also into that stuff. They had the song "I Want to Be Like You," Minnie the Moocher, "Save My Soul." So yeah, they've been around for quite some time.
Yeah. And then there was also the Voodoo Glow Skulls, which I think we've referenced on the show before. Sort of punk ska band, also with a lot of Hispanic members.
I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to eat my hat on this one because I mixed up Big Bad Voodoo Daddy and Voodoo Glow Skulls. Voodoo Glow Skulls is the ska band that would do the songs in Spanish. Big Bad Voodoo Daddy was one of the big band revivalists that came out with, Mambo No. 5 and all that stuff. So.
Oh, got it. Okay. Yeah. So Voodoo Glow Skulls, they had Band Geek Mafia was one that I think got them a lot of notoriety in the ska scene.
Yeah.
Fun band.
Voodoo Glow Skulls, arguably a better band. So we will say they're a better band.
Particularly if you like sort of punk. The vocalist was not known for his particularly melodic harmonies.
Yes. Agreed.
Very fun. Really enjoy the Voodoo Glow Skulls.
Yes,
but you're not if you're like, hey, I really like Justin Timberlake's voice, I'm going to go listen to some Voodoo Glow Skulls. Nope. You're probably not going to find a lot of similarity in those two styles.
Not going to find a crooner there. Nope.
So anyway, I think that is all we have to say about Madame Marie Laveau Paris today. So let's talk about some recommendations.
Recommendations. My recommendation is something I learned recently, and I am starting to like sparkling water.
Heck yeah. Welcome to the club.
Yeah, I saw a thing that I have enjoyed historically. The first time I ever had seltzer water, I almost threw up because I thought it would taste like soda. I thought it would taste like Sprite. It does not taste like Sprite. Yeah. It just tastes like
no, it does
bubbly
not.
Water.
Expectations are important there.
Yes. So this is a shaping procedure for me, and I've been working on this. The company I found that I really enjoy is a company called Waterloo.
Waterloo is so good.
It's
I'm so on board with this recommendation. Yeah, I love them.
Right now, they have 2 limited time seasonal offerings. They have a spiced apple and a cranberry. I have not been able to find those yet, but I'm going to try to because they look really good.
Okay.
But they have blackberry lemonade, cherry limeade, black cherry, lemon lime, grape, strawberry, summerberry, pineapple, watermelon, grapefruit, and the original. But the one that I want to talk about today is one that I got yesterday, and that is the peach Waterloo. And that one is so good. Yesterday I was out in the sun for, I don't know, like 12 hours. And it was really great to have a cooler full of, Florida sun, which is like basically hugging the sun. It's like, you ever get one of those hugs that like somebody holds you just a little bit too long and you're like, now this is awkward.
Right.
Well, that's kind of what the sun does to Florida. Sun does it and it's like, it's going to be okay, I feel like is what it's doing. So Waterloo, the one that I really like is peach. And I've got a case of it right now and I'm really enjoying it. So that's my recommendation. It's just peach Waterloo right now.
Fabulous. Yeah, I love that. The cherry limeade I've been particularly fond of, for sure. So yeah, they're really good. They're one of them. I've been really enjoying the seltzer waters lately as well. So I'm bored with that. Love that recommendation.
Good stuff. I love it.
Okay, I'm going to recommend a TV show. This is season 3 of the TV show Miracle Workers. I forget what network it's on. I know that I've been watching it on HBO Max. The first season started with the idea of when people die, they basically get a job working at the corporation that is heaven. And there's like multiple afterlives you can choose to work in. And it was very meta, very fun, very funny. So it's got Geraldine Viswanathan, Daniel Radcliffe, Steve Buscemi, and then several other guests come on the show as well. It's a comedic show. It always follows sort of a storyline. Now, what was interesting is that after season 1 ends in such a way that they're like, well, I guess that's the end of that story.
Right.
Because there's really nowhere else you could go. And so season 2, they basically just redid the whole thing and said like, okay, now we're going to take this cast of people and we're going to put them in this like medieval times scenario where there's like castles and knights and wizards and that sort of thing. So that season was very funny and just totally different direction. And then season 3, they're like, okay, now we're going to do Oregon Trail. So again, same cast, totally different characters. Yeah. It's meant to be very funny. It's not meant to be super realistic. Their language is very contemporary in such a way that it's like, it's almost silly how it's such an anachronism, but they also sort of roll the credits and stuff in the style of like an old Western. But anyway, really funny, really enjoyable. At one point, not to spoil it too much, but you do get to see Daniel Radcliffe in drag, and it is fabulous. So
he's a gem.
I could watch anything he's in. He is so good.
Absolutely.
So, Miracle Workers, season 3, Oregon Trail. I know you can find it on HBO Max. But
I like it.
Okay, well, if you would like to tell us about a comedic TV show or a beverage you're particularly enjoying, you should let us know what those things are. If you are a practitioner of VooDoo or you've been experienced VooDoo in some way and you'd like to help us fill in some of the gaps or correct anything we said, we would absolutely love it if you'd reach out to us.
Yeah, or share resources.
Yeah. You can contact us directly at info@wwd.podcast.com or message us on the main social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, that sort of thing. We will talk to you there. If you'd like to support the show, you can join us on Patreon. And when you do that, a few things are going to happen. 1, I'm going to say your name every week, just out of sheer love. 2, you can, depending on the tier you sign up for, you can get episodes early, so you can listen to them without ads before anyone else gets to, sometimes before they're even completely done. And you get to get access to behind the scenes stuff with us recording and us struggling to record sometimes as things break down and whatnot. You can get discounts on merch depending on the tier. So anyway, all kinds of benefits. Join us on Patreon. We love our community. There's a Discord. You can like chat with people on there, that sort of thing. But if you don't want to do that, you can do like a one-time smash and dash type of thing and go buy some merch from our store. We recently added a shirt. Now, when we did our political prisoners, we talked about someone whose name is Hussein al-Halthul, I hope I'm saying that correctly, who was arrested and charged with attempting to destabilize the kingdom. And I loved that so much that we now have a shirt that says attempting to destabilize the kingdom. And on the back has her name and the name of the podcast. So you can pick that up on our merch store. We've got mugs, we've got sweaters, we've got water bottles, we've got stickers, we've got a patch now actually added to the store as well. All kinds of stuff that you can go pick up at our store. We love the support. And you can look really cool wearing podcast merch, which all the cool people do.
That's true.
You can also leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and wherever you listen, you should subscribe, follow, whatever the process is. Make sure that you catch every new episode that comes up, because one of the missions of the show, you will be more well-informed. We're trying to make the world a little bit better place and help you do better at trivia night. That's part of what we're up to.
Yes, 3 things.
So 3 things. Speaking of our Patreon supporters, thank you so much to the people who have already joined us. And again, this is me shouting out for the love. This is Amanda, Brad, the Daily BA, Joshua, Justin, Justine, Kelly, Kim, Costia, Layla, Megan, Mike M, Mike T, Shauna, and Stephanie. Thank you so much. You guys
so
are
wonderful.
Amazing.
Love y'all.
Also, could not do this without my wonderful team of people. We have Justin, Selena, Kyle. Welcome to the team, Patrick and Jess. Been with us for a little while now. Awesome to have them on board. And a huge shout out to our own Alan Kinsella, who now has a new child. So he's a brand new parent.
Welcome to the world, Cooper.
Welcome to the world. Yep. And then, of course, thank you so much for recording with me today, Shane, and your wonderful work on your notes today.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Cool. I don't think I have anything else. Do you have anything to add before we sign off?
Again, I would just say at the end of the day, if you have any feedback, any resources and stuff, please share them with us, because this was one of the most difficult things to review as far as the VooDoo section of this. So we want to make sure we do it right and do it justice.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that second request there. All right. Well, then thank you all for listening. This is Abraham.
This is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day. I hit paste. Now we're just going to see if the pasting happens.